So it goes without saying that having a prestigious university or having worked for a well-known high-performing company in our CV will significantly increase our chances to be successful in the context of a job interview. So simply put, education sells. You being perceived as someone educated sells quite well these days, and in job interviews in particular. Now, what if we haven't been this fortunate? What if we don't have that prestigious university or employer in our CV? What's our best bet to be perceived as someone educated in this context? And I believe an interesting place to start here is to see how Google, or I should say Oxford Languages, defines education. It's either to the process of giving or receiving systematic instruction. Okay, so notice how it goes both ways, either give or receive systematic instruction. And the second definition is probably the ideal of any candidate, is to be perceived as an enlightening experience, or it is an education to watching, all right? With respect to the first definition, the process of giving or receiving, okay, so receiving, that education is, the part with the prestigious CV. But what if we pitch ourselves as someone capable and willing to educate during our job interviews? What if we want to picture ourselves as an educator? I believe this is a very interesting and a very good advice during your job interview. So in my opinion, the moment they'll perceive as someone who knows what they're doing, it is an education to watch, okay? You are very close to actually landing the job offer. And to give an example here of being perceived as an educator, I believe if you look at my YouTube channel, I have two types of content primarily. First is the systematic information, the structured information through, for instance, the lists of the most commonly asked questions in job interviews. So I provide you systematic instruction if you want. And the second type of video is the one with the one-offs, where I give you ideas, such as this video, to be perceived as an educator during the job interview. Of course, in a bid to convince you that I give you good advice, and of course, why not help you to be successful in your careers, okay? To give more specific advice on how can you be perceived as an educator during your job interviews, I'd like to give you 3 pieces of advice here. First, I believe the key ingredient and something that many people forget, unfortunately, during the job interview is to listen. If you manage to convince them that you're someone willing and able to listen during a job interview, I believe you're very close to be perceived to earn their trust, if you want. So a simple tip here would be to simply pause after receiving any question. This was almost 3 seconds. So if you intentionally pause and think about what's your best answer, then I believe you're in a much better spot. And I've seen candidates who made even notes that they should pause after each question or follow-up question to increase their chance of being perceived as a great listener, okay? And the risk of not listening during job interview is that, of course, you are more likely to interrupt your interviewer during that exchange, and I believe this is rarely to your advantage. Okay, so tip number 1, to be perceived as a great educator, listening skills, or be perceived as a great listener. Second tip to do well as an educator is clarity of thought. I'm sure most of you have been through higher education, and even further, you remember one of your best or your worst teachers, and they almost always had that something, that they were able to communicate, to explain complex concepts in very simple words or metrics. And this is something we all want to achieve, but something that it's actually quite complicated for most of us. So how do we achieve clarity of thought? I believe the best ingredient to think about here is to revise your story bank, your answers, until they sound well. I give you that tip to communicate in structured ways using the STAR format, for instance. This would be a starting point for revision, but the more we revise, the more metrics, the relevant metrics we include, the better our probability of reaching that clarity of thought, that that simplicity in our communication that will, in my opinion, significantly increase our chances to be perceived as someone who's willing and able to educate in a context of a job interview. And tip number 3, just quickly here, is to role play. The moment you role play with someone, even if that someone isn't particularly experienced or you're not going for the same roles, I believe it will be, again, a rather enlightening experience, if you want, to qualify your ability to educate someone. I also have a free role play service on my website if you want to try it out. But the point is, I believe for the vast majority of candidates, role play can be a beneficial experience here, again, in a bid to be perceived as an educator. And last but not least, I will close with 3 mistakes you want to avoid. The number 1 mistake you want to avoid is to build a persona that's not you. Okay, so if you want to build a different persona than what you are right now, keep in mind that takes months, if not years. So better focus on clarity of thought, for instance, than to build other personas, and just be yourself. I believe that's the best possible advice. The second mistake you want to avoid here, it's a very common one actually, is prioritization. To prioritize what matters the most for you during a job interview. And too many of you, for instance, invest time into attending some quick courses to get some quick diplomas just a few weeks before the interview. Well, I believe that's not the best investment of your time either. Okay, so be very careful how you prioritize. Best investment of time is in revising stories. That's from experience. And mistake number 3, and this is a big one, please take it seriously, is to sound arrogant. So if you know yourself someone at risk of sounding arrogant, then you should maybe tune up your communication a little bit. But the most common scenario of someone sounding arrogant is when you didn't prepare, but you want to educate someone about something you don't know, okay, during the job interview. So this would be my advice to you in this video. I believe pitching yourself as someone being educated and educating your interviewer in a job interview is a winning strategy for you to land that job offer. Thank you for watching.